Chapter 2. Centaur. Binks set off on foot, wearing a stuffed knapsack and bearing a good hunting knife and a home-cut staff. His mother had urged him to let them hire a guide for him, but Bink had to refuse. The guide would really be a guard to keep him safe. How would he ever live that down? Yet the wilderness beyond the village has it had its hazards for the traveler unfamiliar with it. Few people hiked it alone. He really would have been better off with a guide. Could have had transport on a winged steed. What the heck? I'm sorry, already out the gate with this, but what the heck? This is what I go on about. He just throws in crap like this. He could have had transport on a winged steed, but that would have been expensive and risky in its own fashion. Griffins were often surly creatures. He preferred to make his own way around on the secure ground, if only to prove that he could. Despite the fancied snickers of the village youths, Jama wasn't snickering much at the moment. He was laboring under the mortification spell the village elders had put on him for his attack on Justin Tree. But there were other snickerers. At least Roland had understood. One day you'll discover that the opinions of worthless people are worthless, he had murmured to Bink. You have to do it in your own way. I comprehend that, and wish you well, on your own. Bink had a map, and he knew which path led to the castle of the good magician Humphrey. Rather, which path had led there. The truth was that Humphrey was a crotchety old man who preferred isolation in the wilderness. Periodically, he moved his castle or changed the approaches to it by magical means, so that one never could be sure of finding it. Regardless, Bink intended to track the magician to his lair. The first leg of his journey was familiar. He had spent his whole life in the North Village and explored most of its surrounding bypaths. Hardly any dangerous flora or fauna remained in the immediate vicinity, and those that were potential threats were well known. He stopped to drink at a water hole near a huge needle cactus. As he approached, the plant quivered, making ready to fire on him. Hold, friend, Bink said commandingly. I am of the North Village. The cactus, restrained by the pacification formula, withheld its deadly barrage. The key word was friend. The thing certainly was not a friend, but it had to obey the geas laid on it. Whatever, I don't know what a geas, it's Geis. So I'm guessing that is some sort of some sort of spell or a condition of obligation. I guess that's what that word means. I guess we learned a new word. No genuine stranger would know this, so the cactus was an effective guard against intruders. Animals below a size Animals below a certain size ignored. Animals below a certain size it ignored. He left out a comma there. That's so weird. Since most creatures had to have water sooner or later, this was a convenient compromise. Some areas had been ravaged occasionally by wild griffins and other large beasts, but not the North Village. One experience with an irate needler more than sufficed as a lesson for the animal lucky enough to survive it. Another hour's swift march brought him to less familiar territory, by definition, less safe. What did the people of this area use to guard their water holes? Unicorns trained to impale strangers? Well, he would find out soon enough. The rolling hills and small lakes gave way to rougher terrain, and strange plants appeared. Some had tall antennas that swiveled to orient on him from a distance. Others emitted subtly attractive crooning noises, but had branches bearing powerful pincers. Bink walked at a safe distance around them, taking no unnecessary risks. Once he thought he spied an animal about the size of a man, but had 8 spider-like legs. He moved on rapidly and silently. He saw a number of birds, but these were of little concern. Since they could fly, they had little need for defensive magic against man, so he had no cause to be wary of them, unless he saw any big birds. Those might consider him prey. Once he spied the monstrous form of a rock in the distance, and cowered down, letting it wing on without seeing him. So long as the birds were small, he actually preferred their company, for the insects and bugs were at times aggressive. In fact, a cloud of gnats formed around his head, casting a mass sweat spell that made him even more uncomfortable. Insects had an uncanny ability to discern those with no magic for defense. Maybe they merely used trial and error, getting away with whatever they could. Vink looked about for bug repellent weeds, but found none. Weeds were never where one wanted them. His temper was getting short as the sweat streamed down his nose and into his eyes and mouth. Then two little sucker saps swooped in, sucking up the gnats, and he had relief. Yes, he liked the little birds. He made about 10 miles in 3 hours and was tiring. He was in good condition generally, but was not used to sustained marching with a heavy pack. Ever so often he got a twinge from the ankle he had turned at Lookout Rock. Not a bad twinge, for it turned out to be a minor hurt, just enough to keep him cautious. He sat on a hillock, first making sure it contained no itch ants, though it did have a needle cactus. He approached this very cautiously, uncertain as to whether it had been tamed by the spell. Friend, he said, and just to make sure he spilled out a few drops of water from his canteen onto the soil for its roots to taste. Apparently, it was all right. It did not let fly at him. Even wild things often responded to common courtesy and respect. He broke out the lunch lovingly packed by his mother. He had food for 2 days, enough to get him to the magician's castle under ordinary circumstances. Not that things in Xanth were usually ordinary. He hoped to extend that by staying overnight with some friendly farmer. He would need food for the return trip, too. and in any event did not relish the notion of sleeping outdoors. Night brought out special magic, and it could be ugly. He did not want to find himself arguing cases with a ghoul or ogre, since the case would most likely be the proper disposition of his human bones, whether they should be consumed live, while the marrow was fresh and sweet, or crunched after being allowed to age for a week after death. Different predators had different tastes. He bit into the Cressmato sandwich. Something crunched, startling him, but it was not a bone, just a flavor stem. Bianca certainly knew how to make a sandwich. Roland always teased her about that, claiming she had mastered the art under the tutelage of an old sandwich. Uh, he he makes a pun. Y'all can't see that, but he spelled sandwich, an old sandwich, Sandwitch. Uh, Yet it was unfunny to Bink, for it meant that she was still dependent. He was still dependent on her until he finished what she had prepared and foraged for himself. A crumb dropped and vanished. Bink looked around and spied a chipmouse chewing busily. It had conjured the crumb 10 feet, avoiding the risk of close approach. Bink smiled. I wouldn't hurt you, Chip. Then he heard something. The pounding of hooves. Some big animal was charging, or a mounted man approached. Either could mean trouble. Bink stuffed a chunk of wing cow cheese into his mouth, suffering a brief vision of the cow flying up to graze on the treetops after being relieved of her load of milk. He closed up his pack and shrugged his arms under the straps. He took his long staff in both hands. He might have to fight it or run. The creature came into sight. It was a centaur, the body of a horse with the upper torso of a man. He was naked, in the manner of his kind, with muscular flanks, broad shoulders, and an ornery visage. Bink held his staff before him, ready for defense, but not aggressively so. He had little confidence in his ability to outfight the massive creature, and no hope of outrunning. But maybe the centaur was not unfriendly, despite appearances, or did not know that Bink had no magic. The centaur pulled up close. He held his bow ready, an arrow nocked. He looked formidable indeed. Bink had developed a lot of respect for centaurs in school. This obviously was no elder sage, however, but a youthful brute. You are trespassing, the centaur said. Move off this range. Now wait, Bink said reasonably. Now wait. Maybe. I'm a traveler, following the established path. It's a public right-of-way. Move off, the centaur repeated, his bow swinging around menacingly. Bink was normally a good-natured fellow, but he had a certain ornery streak that manifested in times of stress. This journey was vitally important to him. This was a public path, and he had his fill of deferring to magical menaces. The centaur was a magical creature, having no existence in the mundane world beyond Xanth, by all accounts. Thus Bink's aggravation against magic was stirred up again, and he did something foolish. Go soak your tail, he snapped. The centaur blinked. Now he looked even huskier, his shoulders broader, his chest deeper, and his equine body even more dynamic than before. Obviously, he was not accustomed to such language, at least not directed at him, and the experience startled him. In due course, however, he made the requisite mental and emotional adjustments, signaled by an awe-inspiring nodding of oversized muscles. A deep red, almost purple wash of color ascended from the hairy horse base up through the bare stomach and scarred chest, accelerating and brightening as it funneled into the narrower neck, finally dyeing the head and ugly face explosively. As that inexorable tide of red rage ignited his ears and penetrated to his brain, the centaur acted. His bow swung about, the knocked arrow drawing back. As it bore on Bink, the arrow let fly. Naturally, Bink wasn't there. He had had ample opportunity to read the storm signals. As the bow moved, he ducked under. Then he straightened up, right under the centaur's nose, and brought his staff around in a hard swing. It fetched the creature a smart rap on the shoulder, doing no actual harm, but it had to sting severely. The centaur emitted a bellow of sheer impassioned rage. What's our boy doing here? He's starting a fight with a centaur. This is irrational. He whipped his bow around with his left hand, while his right hand dived for the quiver of arrows hanging on his equine shoulder. But now Bink's staff was tangled in his bow. The creature threw down the bow. The action ripped the staff out of Bink's hands. The centaur made a huge fist. Bink scurried around to the rear as that fist swung at him. But the rear of the centaur was no safer than the front. One leg licked back violently. Through a freak of timing, it missed Bink and clubbed into the trunk of the needle cactus. The cactus responded with a barrage of flying needles. Even as the hoof struck, Bink threw himself flat on the ground. The needles overshot him and plunked into the handsome posterior of the centaur. Okay, here, I hate to interrupt again, but what's this? The handsome posterior of the centaur. Handsome posterior. Okay, Pierce. Once more, Bink had lucked out. He was miraculously untouched by either hoof or needles. The centaur neighed with truly amazing volume. These needles hurt. Each one was 2 inches long and barbed, and 100 of them decorated the glistening surface, tacking the tail to the donkey, as it were. Had the creature been facing the cactus, he could have been blinded or killed as the barbs punctured his face and neck. He was lucky, too, though he hardly seemed to appreciate his fortune at the moment. Now there were no bounds to the centaur's anger. An unholy contortion of utter rage ravished his homely face. He did a massive prance, his hindquarters rising and descending in an arc, bringing his front part abruptly adjacent to Bink. Two crushingly powerful arms shot out, and two horny hands closed about Bink's relatively puny neck. Slowly they tightened, vice-like deliberation. Bink, lifted off the ground so that his feet dangled, was helpless. He knew he was about to be strangled. He could not even plead for mercy, for his air and much of his blood were cut off. Chester! A female voice cried. The centaur stiffened. This did Bink no good. Chester, you put that man down this instant, the voice said peremptorily. Do you want an interspecies incident? But, Cherie, Chester protested, his color abating several shades. He's an intruder, and he asked for it. He's on the king's path, Cherie said. Travelers are immune to molestation. You know that. Now let him go. The lady centaur hardly seemed to be in a position to enforce her demand, but Chester slowly bowed to her authority. Can't I just squeeze him a little? He begged, squeezing a little. Bink's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. If you do, I'll never run with you again. Down. Oh. Reluctantly, Chester eased off. Bink slid to the ground, reeling. What a fool he had been to tangle with this brute. The female centaur caught him as he swayed. Poor thing, she exclaimed, cushioning his head against a plush pillow. Are you all right? Bink opened his mouth, gagged, and tried again. It seemed that his crushed throat would never unkink. Yes, he croaked. Who are you? What happened to your hand? Did Chester? No, no, Bink said hastily. He didn't bite off my finger. That's a childhood injury. See, it's long since healed over. She inspected it carefully, running her surprisingly delicate fingers over it. Yes, I see. Still, I, I'm Bink of the North Village, he said. He turned his head to face her and discovered the nature of the pillow he rested on. Oh no, not again, he thought. Will I always be babied by women? Centaur females were smaller than the males, but still looked somewhat taller than human beings. Their humanoid portions were somewhat better endowed. He jerked his head away from her bare front. It was bad enough being babied by his mother, let alone a lady centaur. I am traveling south to see the magician Humphrey. Cherie nodded. She was a beautiful creature, both as horse and as human, with glossy flanks and a remarkable human forefigure. Her face was attractive, only very slightly long of nose with the equine manner. Her brown human hair trailed all the way down to her saddle region, balancing her similarly flowing tail. And this ass waylaid you? Well, Bink looked at Chester, again noting the rippling muscle beneath the deadly glower. What would happen when the filly departed? It was it was a misunderstanding. I'll bet, Cherie said. But Chester relaxed a little. Evidently, he did not want to tangle with his girlfriend. Bink could readily appreciate why. If Cherie was not the loveliest and spunkiest centaur of the herd, she was surely close to it. I'll just be moving on now, Bink said. He could have done this at the outset, allowing Chester to run him off in a southerly direction. He had been as much to blame for the altercation as the centaur. Sorry about the problem. He held out his hand to Chester. Chester showed his teeth, which were more like horse's teeth than human ones. He made a big fist. Chester, Cherie snapped. Then, as the centaur guiltily relaxed his fist, what happened to your flank? The male's complexion darkened again, but not precisely with rage this time. He trotted his damaged posterior around to avoid the inquiring gaze of the female. Bink had almost forgotten about the needles. They must still be hurting, and it would hurt more to yank them out. What a pain in the tail! A most awkward locale to discuss in a mixed company. He almost felt sympathy for the surly creature. Chester suppressed his assorted reactions and with fine discipline took Bink's hand. I hope everything comes out all right in the end, Bink said, with a smile that became a bit broader than intended. In fact, he feared it resembled a smirk, and abruptly he knew he shouldn't have chosen those particular words or that particular expression on this particular occasion. Something homicidal reddened the whites of the centaur's eyes. Quite all right, he gritted through the grinding of clenched teeth. His hand began to squeeze, but his eyes were not yet so bloodshot as to miss the filly's glare. The fingers relaxed unwillingly. Another close call. Bink could have had his finger bones pulped in that grip. I'll give you a lift, Cherie decided. Chester, put him on my back. Chester put his hands under Bink's elbows and hoisted him like a feather. For a moment, Bink feared he would be thrown 50 feet, but Cherie's fair eye was still on them, and so he landed safely and gently on the lady's back. Is that your staff? She inquired, glancing at the tangled staff and bow. And Chester, without even being directed, lifted the staff and returned it to Bink, who tucked it slantwise between his back and his pack for easy transport. Put your arms around my waist so you won't fall off when I move, Cherie said. Good advice. Bink was inexperienced at riding, and there was no saddle. Very few honest horses remained in Xanth. Unicorns were very touchy about being mounted, and the winged horses were almost impossible to catch or tame. Once, when Bink was a child, a horsefly had been singed by a dragon, losing its flight feathers, and had to prostitute itself so far as to give the villagers short rides in exchange for food and protection. The moment it had recovered, it had flown away. That had been Bink's only prior riding experience. He leaned forward. The staff interfered, preventing him from bending his back sufficiently. He reached back to draw it out, and it fell out of his hands to the ground. There was a snort from Chester that sounded suspiciously like humor, but the centaur picked it up and returned it to him. Bink tucked it under his arm this time, leaned forward again, and hugged Cherie's slender waist, heedless of Chester's renewed glower. Some things were worth the risk, such as getting out of here in a hurry. You go to the vet and get those needles out of your, Sherry began, speaking over her shoulder to the male. Right away, Chester interrupted. He waited for her to start, then turned and cantered off in the direction he had came from, a little awkwardly. Probably each motion inflamed his hindquarters more. Sherry trotted down the path. Chester is really a good creature at heart, she said apologetically, but he does tend to be a bit arrogant, and he gets his tail all knotted up when balked. We've had some trouble with outlaws recently, and human outlaws? Bink asked. Yes, kids from the north, doing mischief, doing mischief magic, gassing our livestock, shooting swords into trees, making dangerous pits seem to appear under our feet, and that sort of thing. So naturally, Chester assumed, I know the culprits, Bink said. I had a scrape with them myself. They've been grounded now. If I had known they were coming down here, there just doesn't seem to be much discipline on the range these days, she said. According to the covenant, your king is supposed to keep order, but recently, our king is getting old, Bink explained. He's losing his power, and there's a lot of trouble cropping up. He used to be a major magician, a storm brewer. We know, she agreed. When the fireflies infested our oat fields, he generated a storm that rained 5 days and drowned them all. Of course, it also ruined our crops, but the flies were already doing that already. Every day, new fires. At least we were able to replant without further molestation. We are not forgetting the help he rendered. So we don't want to make an issue of it. But I don't know how much longer stallions like Chester are going to put up with these annoyances. Why I wanted to talk with you. Maybe when you go home, if you could call things to attention of the king. I don't think that would work. I'm sure the king wants to keep order. He just doesn't have the power anymore. Then perhaps it is time for a new king. He's getting senile. That means he hasn't got the sense to step down and won't admit there's any problem. Yes, but problems don't go away by being ignored. She made a delicate feminine snort. Something has to be done. Maybe I could get some advice from the magician Humphrey, Bink said. It's a serious business, deposing a king. I don't think the elders would go for it. He did good work. He did do good work in his prime, and there's really nobody to replace him. You know that only a great magician can be king. Yes, of course. We centaurs are all scholars, you know. Sorry, I forgot. Our village school is run by a centaur. I just wasn't thinking of that. In the wilderness. Understandable, though I'll call this range not wilderness. I specialize in humanoid history, and Chester studies horsepower applications. Others are legal scholars, experts in natural sciences, philosophers. She broke off. Now hang on. There's a trench up ahead. I've got to hurdle. Bink had been relaxing, but now he leaned forward again and clasped his hands tightly around her waist. She had a sleek, comfortable back, but it was too easy to slide off. However, if she weren't a centaur, he would never have had the nerve to assume such a position. Cherie picked up speed, galloping down the hill, and the motion made him bounce alarmingly. Peering ahead under her arm, he saw the trench. Trench! It was a gorge, some 10 feet across, rushing up at them. Now he was more than alarmed, he was frightened. His hands became sweaty, and he began to slide off the side. Then she leaped with a single mighty spasm of her haunches and sailed up and across. Bink slipped further. He had a glimpse of the stony bottom of the trench. Then they landed. The jolt caused him to slide around even more. His arms scrambled desperately for a more secure hold and wandered into distinctly awkward territory. Yet if he let go, Cherie caught him around the waist and set him on the ground. Easy, she said. We made it. Bink blushed. I'm sorry. I started to fall and just grabbed. I know. I felt your weight shift as I leaped. If you had done it on purpose, I'd have dropped you into the trench. And in that instance, she looked uncomfortably like Chester. He believed her. She could drop a man into a trench if she had reason to. Centaurs were tough creatures. Maybe I'd better walk now. No, there's another trench. They've been opening up recently. Well, I could climb down one side and up the other carefully. It would take longer, but no, there are nickelpedes down at the bottom. Bink quailed. Nickelpedes were like centipedes, but about 5 times as large and considered considerably more deadly. Their myriad legs could cling on to vertical rock faces, and their pincers could gouge out discs of flesh an inch across. They inhabited shallow crevices not liking direct sunlight. Even dragons hesitated to walk through ditches known to be infested by nyctopedes, and for good reason. The cracks have been opening up recently, Cherie continued as she kneeled to permit Bink to mount her again. He picked up his dropped staff and used it to help him climb. I'm afraid there's big magic brewing somewhere, spreading throughout Xanth, causing discord in animal, vegetable, and mineral. I'll get you across that next trench, then it's beyond Centaur territory. It hadn't occurred to him that there would be such barriers. They didn't show on his map. The trail was supposed to be clear and reasonably safe throughout, but the map had been made years ago, and these cracks in the ground were new, Cherie said. Nothing in Xanth was permanent, and travel was always somewhat risky. He was lucky he had obtained the Lady Centaur's help. The landscape changed, as if the trench separated one type of place from another. Before it had been rolling hills and fields, now it was forest. The path became narrower, crowded by huge mock pine trees, and the forest floor was a red-brown carpet of mock needles. Here and there were patches of light green ferns, which seemed to thrive where weeds could not, and regions of dark green moss. A cold wind gusted through, tousling Cherie's hair and mane, carrying strands back against Bink. It was quiet here, and there was a pleasant piney smell. He felt like dismounting and lying down in a bed of moss, just appreciating this peaceful spot. Don't do it, Cherie warned. Bink jumped. I didn't know centaurs practice magic. Magic, she inquired, and he knew she was frowning. You read my mind. She laughed. Hardly. We do no magic, but we do know the effect these woods have on humans. It's the peace spell the trees make to protect themselves from getting chopped. Nothing wrong in that, Bink said. I wasn't going to chop 'em anyway. They don't trust your good intentions. I'll show you. She stepped carefully on the beaten trail. She stepped carefully off the beaten trail, her hooves sinking into the soft pine needle floor. She threaded her way between several dagger-forked buck spruce trees, past a thin snake palm, which didn't even bother to hiss at her, and stopped near a tangle willow. Not too near. Everyone knew better than that. There, she murmured. Bink looked where her hand pointed. A human skeleton lay on the ground. Murder? He asked, shivering. No, just sleep. He came to rest here, as you wished to just now, and never got up the gumption to depart. Complete peace is an insidious thing. Yes, he breathed. No violence, no distress, just loss of initiative. Why bother to work and eat when it was so much easier to merely relax? If a person wanted to commit suicide, this would be the ideal manner, but he had reason to live so far. That's part of why I like Chester, Cherie said. He'll never succumb to anything like this. That was a certainty. There was no peace in Chester. Cherie herself would never succumb, Bink thought, though she was considerably more gentle. Bink felt the lassitude, despite the sight of the skeleton, but she was evidently able to resist the spell. Maybe the biology of the centaurs differed enough, or maybe she had savagery in her soul that her angelic form and pleasant words masked. Most likely a bit of both. Let's get out of here. She laughed. Don't worry. I'll see you safely through it. But don't come back this way alone. Travel with an enemy if you can find one. That's best. Better than a friend? Friends are peaceful, she explained. Oh, that did make sense. He'd never relax under a pine tree if he was there with someone like Jama. He'd be too afraid to get a sword in his gut. But what an ironic necessity to locate an enemy to accompany one, to walk through a peaceful forest. Magic makes strange companions, he murmured. This peace spell also explained why there was so little other magic here. The plants did not need individual defensive spells. No one was going to attack. Even the tangle tree had seemed quiescent, though he was sure it would make a grab when it had the chance, since that was the way it fed. Interesting how quickly magic faded when the immediate imperative of survival abated. No, there was magic, strong magic. It was the communal magic of the entire forest, with each plant contributing its modicum. If a person could figure out a way to nullify the effect in himself, perhaps with a counter charm, he could live here in absolute safety. That was worth remembering. They threaded their way back to the pass and resumed travel. Bink almost slid off his perch twice, falling asleep, each time awakening with a shock. He would never have made it out here alone. He was glad to see the pine forest thin, shifting into hardwoods. He felt more alert, more violent, and that was good. Harder wood, harder feelings. I wonder who that was back there, Bink mused. Oh, I know, Cherie answered. He was one of the last wave who got lost, wandered in here, and decided to rest forever. But the last wavers were savage, Bink said. They slaughtered indiscriminately. All waves were savage when they came, with one exception. We centaurs know. We were here before the first wave. We had to fight all of you until the Covenant. You didn't have magic, but you had weapons and numbers and vicious cunning. Many of us died. My ancestors were first wave, Bink said with a certain pride. We always had magic, and we never fought the centaurs. Now don't get aggressive, human. Just because I took you out of the peace pines, you do not have our knowledge of history. Bink realized he'd better moderate his tone if he wanted to continue the ride. And he did want to continue. Cherie was pleasant company, and she obviously knew all the local magic, so that he was able to avoid all threats. Last and most, she was giving his tired legs a good rest while bearing him forward rapidly. Already she had taken him a good 10 miles. I'm sorry. It was a matter of family pride. Well, that's no bad thing, she said, mollified. She made her way delicately across a wooden trestle over a bubbling brook. Suddenly, Bink was thirsty. May we stop for a drink? He asked. She snorted again, a very horse-like sound. Not here. Anyone who drinks from that water becomes a fish. A fish? Suddenly, Bink was twice as glad to have this guide. He surely would have drunk otherwise, unless she was merely telling him that to tease him, or trying to scare him away from this area. Why? The river is trying to restock itself. It was cleansed out by the evil magician Trent 21 years ago. Bink remained a bit skeptical about inanimate magic, especially of that potency. How could a river desire anything? Still, he remembered how Lookout Rock had saved itself from being broken up. Better to play it safe and assume that some features of the landscape could cast spells. Meanwhile, the reference to Trent preempted his attention. The evil magician was here? I thought he was a phenomenon of our own village. Trent was everywhere, she said. He wanted us centaurs to support him, and when he balked, and when we balked, because of the covenant, you know, not to interfere in human business, he showed us his power by changing every fish in this river into a lightning bug. Then he departed. I think he figured out that those shocking buggers would force us to change our minds. Why didn't he change the fish into a human army and try to conquer you that way? No good, Mink. They would have had the bodies of men, but their minds would have remained fish. They would have made very wishy-washy soldiers, and even if they had been good soldiers, they would hardly have served the man who had put them under the enchantment. They would have attacked Trent. Yes, I wasn't thinking. So he transformed them into lightning bugs and got well away from there so they couldn't shock him. So they went for the next best thing. Yes, it was a bad time for us. All those bugs were a pain. They pestered us in clouds, scorching us with their little lightning bolts. I've still got scars on mine. She paused, grimacing. On my tail. It was obviously a euphemism. What did you do? Bink inquired, fascinating, glancing back to see whether he could locate the scars. What he could see seemed flawless. Trent was exiled soon after that, and we got Humphrey to abate the spell. But the good magician isn't a transformer. No, but he told us where to find repellent magic to drive off the flies. Denied our electro-cooked flesh, the scourge soon died out. Good information is as good as good action, and the good magician certainly had the information. That's why I'm going to him. Bink agreed, but he charges a year's service for a spell. You're telling us 300 head of centaur, 1 year each. What a job. All of you had to pay? What did you have to do? We are not permitted to tell, she said diffidently, 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 diffidently. Now Bink was doubly curious, but he knew better than to ask again. A centaur's given word was inviolate, but what could Humphrey have needed done that he could not do himself by one of his 100 spells, or at least by means of his good information? Humphrey was basically a divinator. Anything he didn't know, he could find out, and that gave him enormous power. Probably the reason the village elders had not asked the good magician what to do about their senile king was that they knew he would answer, depose the king, and install a new, young, fresh magician instead. That they obviously weren't ready to do, even if they could find such a young magician to serve. Well, there were many mysteries and many problems in Xanth, and it was hardly given to Bink to know of them all or to solve any. He had learned long ago to bow, however ungraciously, to the inevitable. They were past the river now, and climbing. The trees were closing in more thickly, their great round roots riding across the path. No hostile magic threatened. Either the centaurs had cleaned out the area, the way the villagers had cleaned out Bink's home region, or Cherie knew this path so well that she avoided spells automatically, without seeming to. Probably some of both. Life itself, he thought, involved many alternate explanations for perplexing questions, and was generally some of both. Few things were hard and fast in Xanth. What was that history you know that I don't? Bink inquired, becoming bored by the trail. About the waves of human colonization. We have records of them all. Since the Shield and the Covenant, things have quietened down. The waves were terrors. Not the first wavers, Bink said loyally. We were peaceful. That's what I mean. You are peaceful now, except for a few of your young hoodlums. So you assume your ancestors were peaceful then. But my ancestors found it otherwise. They would have been happier had man never discovered Xanth. My teacher was a centaur, Bink said. He never said anything about. He'd have been fired if he had told you the truth. Bink felt uneasy. You're not teasing me, are you? I'm not looking for any trouble. I have a very curious mind, but I've already had more trouble than I care for. She turned her head around to fix him with a gentle stare, her torso twisted from the human waist to facilitate the motion. The torque was impressive. Her midsection was more limber than that of a human girl, perhaps because it was harder for a centaur to turn her whole body around. But if she had a human lower section to match the upper section, what a creature she would be. Your teacher didn't lie to you. A centaur never lies. He merely edited his information on orders from the king, so as not to force on the impressionable minds of children things their parents did not want them to hear. Education has ever been thus. Oh, I wasn't implying any slight on his integrity, Bink said quickly. I liked him. As a matter of fact, he was the only one who didn't get fed up with all my questions. I learned a lot from him, but I guess I didn't ask about history much. I was more preoccupied with something he couldn't tell me, but at least he did tell me about the magician Humphrey. What is your question for Humphrey, if I may ask? What difference did it make? I have no magic, he confessed. At least I seem to have none. All through my childhood, I was at a disadvantage because I couldn't use magic to compete. I could run faster than anybody else, but the kid who could levitate still won the race. Stuff like that. Centaurs get along perfectly well without magic, she pointed out. We wouldn't take magic if we were offered. Bink did not believe that, but did not make an issue of it. Humans have a different attitude, I guess. When I got older, it got worse. Now I'll be exiled if I don't show some magic talent. I'm hoping Magician Humphrey can, well, if I do have magic, it means I can stay and marry my girl and have some pride. Finally, Cherie nodded. I suspected it was something like that. I suppose if I were in your situation, I would choke down the necessity of having magic. Though I really think your culture's values are distorted. You should base your citizenship on superior qualities of personality and achievement, not on. Exactly, Bink agreed fervently. She smiled. You really should have been a centaur. She shook her head so that her hair flung out prettily. You have undertaken a hazardous journey. not more hazardous than the one to the mundane world that will otherwise be forced on me. She nodded again. Very well. You have satisfied my curiosity. I'll satisfy yours. I'll tell you the whole truth about the human intrusion into Xanth, but I don't expect you to like it much. I don't expect to like the truth about myself much, Bink said ruefully. I might as well know whatever there is to know. For thousands of years, Xanth was a comparatively peaceful land, she said, assuming the somewhat pedantic tone of he remembered from his school days. Probably every centaur was at heart a teacher. There was magic, very strong magic, but no unnecessary viciousness. We centaurs were the dominant species, but, as you know, we have absolutely no magic. We are magic. I suppose we migrated here from the Mundania originally, but that was so long ago, it is lost even to our records. Something tripped over in Bink's mind. I wonder if that really is true about magic creatures not being able to work spells. I saw a chipmouse conjure a crumb of bread. Oh, are you sure it wasn't a chipmunk? That is a normal creature, according to our taxonomy, so it might work magic. You tax animals? Bink asked, amazed. Taxonomy, she repeated with an indulgent smile. The classification of living things. Another centaur specialty. Oh, Bink considered, embarrassed. I thought it was a chipmouse, but I'm not quite certain now. Actually, we're not quite certain either, she admitted. It may be that some magical creatures can work magic, but as a general rule, a creature either does magic or is magic, not both, which is just as well. Think of the havoc a dragon magician could make. Binks thought of it. He shuddered. Let's get back to the history lesson, he suggested. About 1,000 years ago, the first human tribe discovered Xanth. They thought it was just another peninsula. They moved in and cut down the trees and slaughtered the animals. There was more than enough magic here to repulse them, but Xanth had never been subjected to such callous, systematic ravage before, and we did not quite believe it. We thought the humans would leave soon, but then they realized Xanth was magic. They saw the animals levitating and the trees moving their branches. They hunted the unicorns and griffins. If you wonder why those big animals hate people, let me assure you they have good reason. Their ancestors would not have survived if they tried to be friendly. The first wavers were non-magical creatures in a land of spells, and after they got over the initial shock, they liked it. Now that's wrong, Fink exclaimed. Humans have the very strongest magic. Look at all the great magicians. You yourself told me just now how even evil magician changed all the fish. Pipe down before I buck you off, Cherry snapped. Her tail swished menacingly past Bink's ear. You don't know the quarter of it. Of course humans have magic now. That's part of their problem, but not at the start. Bink backed down again. It was increasingly easy to do. He liked this centaur lady very well. She was answering questions he hadn't even thought to ask yet. Sorry, this is new to me. You remind me of Chester. I bet you're awful stubborn, too. Yes, Bink said contritely. She laughed, and it sounded a bit like neighing. I do like you, human. I hope you find your. She pursed her lips distastefully. Magic. And then she flashed a sunny smile and as quickly sobered. Those first waivers had no magic, and when they found out what magic could do, they were fascinated, but a bit afraid of it. A number of them perished in a lake that had a drown spell, and some ran afoul of dragons. And when they met the first basilisk, are there still basilisks? Bink inquired worriedly, abruptly remembering the omen of the chameleon. It had stared at him in the guise of a basilisk just before it died, as if its spell had backfired. He had yet to be sure of the meaning of that sequence. Yes, there are, but not many, she answered. Both humans and centaurs labor to stamp them out. Their glance is fatal to us, too, you know. Now they hide because they know that the first intelligent creature killed that way will bring an avenging army of mirror-masked warriors down on them. A basilisk is no match for a forewarned man or centaur. It's just a small winged lizard, with the head and claws of a chicken. Not very intelligent. Not that it usually needs to be. Say, Bink exclaimed, maybe that's the missing factor. A creature can do magic or be magic or smart or any two of the three, but never all three. So a chipmouse might conjure, but not a smart dragon. She turned her head around, about to face him again. That's a novel idea. You're pretty smart yourself. I'll have to think about it. But until we verify it, don't go into the central wilderness unprotected. There just might be a smart spell throwing monster in there. I won't go into the wilderness, Bink promised. At least, I won't stray from the cleared path through it until I get to the magician's castle. I don't want any lizards looking death at me. Your ancestors were more aggressive, she remarked. That's why so many of them died. But they conquered Xanth and formed an enclave where magic was banned. They liked the country and the use of magic, you see, but they didn't want it too close to the home. So they burned the forest there, killed all magical animals and plants, and built a great stone wall. The ruins! Bink exclaimed. I thought those old stones were from an enemy camp. They are from the first wave, she insisted. But I'm descended from. I said you wouldn't like this. I don't, he agreed. But I want to hear it. How can my ancestors have. They settled in here in their walled village and planted mundane crops and herded mundane cattle. Beans and wingless cows. They married the women they had brought along or that they could raid from the closest mundane settlements and had children. Xanth was a good land, even in that region expunged of magic. But then something amazing happened. Cherie turned to face him again, glancing obliquely in a manner that would have been most fetching in a human girl. In fact, it was fetching in a centaur girl, especially if he squinted so as to see her only human portion. Splendidly fetching, despite his knowledge that centaurs live longer than humans, so that she was probably 50 years old. She looked 20, a 20 that few humans ever achieved. No halter would hold this filly. What happened? He asked, catering to her evident desire for an intellectual response. Centaurs were good storytellers, and they did like a good audience. Her children came up magic, she said. Aha! So first waivers were magic. No, they were not. The land of Xanth is magic. It's an environmental effect, but it works much better with children, who are more formative, and it works best with babies conceived and birthed here. Adults, even of long residence, tend to suppress the talents they have because they know better. But children accept what is. So not only do they have more natural talent, they use it with more enthusiasm. I never knew that, he said. My folks have much more magic than I do. Some of my ancestors were magicians, but me, he sobered. I'm afraid I was terrible disappointment to my parents. By rights, I should have had very strong magic, maybe even been a magician myself. Instead, Cherie discreetly did not comment. At first, the humans were shocked, but soon they accepted it and even encouraged the development of special talents. One of the youngsters had the ability to transform lead into gold. They ravaged the hills, searching for lead, and finally had to send a mission to obtain it from Mundania. It was almost as if lead had become more valuable than gold. But Xanth has no dealings with the mundane world. You keep forgetting. This is ancient history. Sorry again. I wouldn't interrupt so much if I weren't so interested. You are an excellent audience, she said, and he felt pleased. Most humans would refuse to listen at all because it's not a complimentary history, not to your kind. I'd probably be less open-minded if I didn't face exile myself, he admitted. About all I have to work with is my brain and body, so I'd better not fool myself. A commendable philosophy. You are, incidentally, getting a longer ride than I planned because you pay such good, responsive attention. At any rate, they got the lead out, but paid a hideous price because the mundanes of Mundania learned about the magic. They were true to their type, greedy and rapacious. The notion of cheap gold sent them into a frenzy. They invaded. They invaded, stormed the wall, and killed all the first wave men and children. But Bink protested, horrified. These were the second wavers, Cherie said gently. They saved the first waver women, you see, because the second wave was an all-male army. They thought there was a machine to convert the lead into gold, or an alchemical process organized by secret formula. They didn't really believe in magic, that it was just a convenient term to describe the unknown. So they didn't realize that the lead was converted into gold by the magic of a child. And too late. They destroyed what they came for. Horrible, Bink said. You mean I am descended from the rip of a first wave mother? Yes, there is no other way you can authenticate your lineage. We centaurs had never liked the first wavers, but we were sorry for them then. The second wavers were worse. They were literal pirates, rapacious. Had we known, we would have helped the first wavers fight them off. Our archers could have ambushed them. She shrugged. Centaur archery was legendary. No need to belabor the point. Now the invaders settled, she continued after a pause. They sent their own archers all over Xanth, killing. She broke off, and Bink knew how keenly she felt the irony of her kind being prey to the inferior archery of human beings. She gave a little shudder that most almost dislodged him, and forced herself to continue. Killing centaurs for meat. Not until we organized and ambushed their camp, putting shafts through half of them, did they agree to let us alone. Even after that, they did not honor their agreement very well, for they had precious little sense of honor, and their children had magic, Bink continued, seeing it now. So the third waivers invaded and killed off the second waivers. Yes, this happened after several generations, though. It was every bit as vicious when it came. The second waivers had become tolerably good neighbors, all things considered, by then. Again, only the women were saved, and not many of them. Because they had been in Xanth all their lives, their magic was strong. They used it to eliminate their rapist husbands one by one in ways that could not be directly traced to the woman. But their victory was their defeat, for now they had no families at all. So they had to invite in more mundanes. This is ghastly, Binks said. I am descended from 1,000 years of ignominy. Not entirely. The history of man in Xanth is brutal, but not without redeeming values, even greatness. The second wave women organized and brought in only the finest men they could locate. Strong, just, kind, intelligent men who understood the background but came from principle than good. They promised to keep the secret and to uphold the values of Xanth. They were mundanes, but they were noble ones. The fourth waivers, Fink exclaimed, the finest of them all. Yes, the Xanth women were widows and victims of harvest and finally murderesses. Some were old or scarred physically and emotionally by the campaign, but they all had strong magic and iron determination. They were the survivors of the cruel upheaval that had wiped out all other humans in Xanth. These qualities were quite evident. When the new men learned the whole truth, some turned about and returned to the Mundania, but others liked marrying witches. They wanted to have children with potent magic, and they thought it might be hereditary, so they regarded youth and beauty as secondary. They made excellent husbands. Others wanted the potentials of the unique land of Xanth developed and protected. They were the environmentalists, and magic was the most precious part of the environment. And not all the fourth waivers were men. Some were carefully selected young women brought in to marry the children so that there would not be too much inbreeding. So it was a settlement, not an invasion, and it was not rooted in murder, but based on sound commercial and biological principles. I know, Bink said. That was the wave of the first great magicians. So it was. Of course, there were other waves, but none so crucial, no critical. The effective dominance of human beings in Xanth dates from that fourth wave. Other invasions killed many and drove more into the backwoods, but the continuity was never broken. Just about every truly intelligent or magical person traces his ancestry to the fourth wave. I'm sure you do too. Yes, Mink agreed. I have ancestors from the first six waves, but I always thought the first wave lineage was the most important. The institution of the magic shield finally stopped the waves and kept all mundane creatures out and all Xanth creatures in. It was hailed as the salvation of Xanth, the guarantor of utopia. Somehow things didn't improve much. It is as if the people exchanged one problem for another, a visible threat for an invisible one. In the past century, Xanth has been entirely free from invasion, but other threats have developed, like fireflies and the Wiggles and bad magician Trent. Bink agreed. Magical hazards. Trent was not a bad magician, Cherie corrected him. He was an evil distinction. Uh, he was an evil magician. There's a distinction, a crucial one. Yes, he was a good, he was a good evil magician, Lucky they got rid of him before he took over Xanth. Certainly, but suppose another evil magician appears, or the Wiggles manifest again. Who will save Xanth this time? I don't know, Bink admitted. Sometimes I wonder whether the shield was a really good idea. If the shield was really a good idea. It has the net effect of intensifying the magic in Xanth, preventing dilution from outside, as if that magic were building up toward an explosion point. Yet I certainly wouldn't want to return to the days of the waves. Bink had never thought of it that way. Somehow I find it hard to appreciate the problems of the concentration of magic in Xanth, he said. I keep wishing there were just a little more, enough for me, for my talent. You might be better off without it, she suggested. If you could just obtain a dispensation from the king, ha, Bink said, I'd be better off living like a hermit in the wilderness. My village won't tolerate a man without a talent. Strange inversion, she murmured. What? Oh, nothing. I was just thinking of Herman the Hermit. He was exiled from our herd some years back for obscenity. She laughed. What could be obscene to a centaur? What did he do? Cherie drew up abruptly at the edge of a pretty field of flowers. This is as far as I go, she said tersely. Oh, Bink realized that he had said the wrong thing. I didn't mean to apologize, to offend. I apologize for whatever. Cherie relaxed. You couldn't know. The odor of these flowers makes centaurs do crazy things. I have to stay clear except in real emergencies. I believe Magician Humphrey's castle is about 5 miles south. Keep alert for hostile magic, and I hope you find your talent. Thanks, Bink said gratefully. He slid off her back. His legs were a bit stiff from the long ride, but he did know she had gained him a day's travel time. He walked around to face her and held out his hand. Cherie accepted it, then leaned forward to kiss him, a motherly kiss on his forehead. But Bink wished she had not done that. Bink wished she had not done that, but she smiled mechanically and started walking. He heard her hooves cantering back through the forest, and suddenly he felt lonely. Fortunately, his journey was nearly over, but still he had wondered, what had Herman the Hermit done that the centaurs considered obscene?